Hi, soul friends. It's Tannaz Hosseinpour, and welcome back to another episode of the Minutes on Growth podcast. Today, we have a really special guest here with us. She is rejoining us after 5 years. Time flies. I'd like to welcome Elizabeth Earnshaw. You might know her as Liz Listens on Instagram, the author of I Want This to Work and Till Stress Do Us Part. Welcome.
Thank you for having me again.
I'm so excited to have you on and to discuss this book. We read it in our book club, and the girls and I loved it. I think, as I mentioned to you before, you really do have a talent for simplifying complex relational concepts. And the book was this, especially your second book, I think it touches on a topic that we don't talk about as often and we don't even think about because it's like this invisible the invisible load, the stressors, the
Right.
external stressors that we don't realize is impacting our life and our relationships to the degree that it is. So
Right.
I'm curious, what made you talk about this and write about this?
So, personal life experience first. Years ago, we were just talking about how the last time we interviewed was, I think we interviewed like right at the start of the pandemic,
Hmm.
like right at the beginning when things were pretty wild. But the last time that I was on the podcast, the world was going through a lot of stressors and I was kind of feeling those things absolutely. But a couple years before, I had had a child, and my husband and I had been arguing a lot, and I was really upset with him frequently, and he was really upset because I was upset with him, so he was feeling really withdrawn and kind of like, well, what do I do here? How do I engage with you if you're always so angry? And I remember just thinking, what is wrong with me? I'm a couples therapist. I was going into the office telling people like, don't be so critical. Be more gentle with each other. And then I was going home and I was having a hard time doing it. um, and so I started researching, like what's going on? Does anybody else feel this way after having a baby? Why is it that so many couples break up in the first year? I actually had a therapist at the time. I don't even know if I mentioned this in the book that she said this, but um, she kind of started trying to maybe like convince me to not be in the relationship. And I remember thinking, oh, I wish she knew the stats that after birth, people get into lots of arguments and that divorce is pretty common, but that if people wait, it's not as common, after the first year. And so I started researching that. And what I came across was information about mental load disparities and how common it is when the baby comes, then all of a sudden you start to really notice who's the one that's researching and delegating and doing all of that kind of invisible stuff. I started being hyper focused on that for a little bit, and everything I was seeing in my own couples with my husband, just like, let's talk about this. Let's try to reallocate it. Oh, I see mental load with the couples I'm working with. But then I started to notice that, yes, that needed to change, absolutely. And a lot of partners who are not taking on the mental load are willing to change it. They're open once they hear about it. But then I was seeing that even couples who didn't have that disparity were still struggling. So they'd be like, we figured it out. We've outsourced things, we've redelegated, we've gotten rid of stuff, but like um we're still like fighting all the time. What's going on? And what I started to come to in my own life and with the couples I was working with is like they were still under a ton of stress. So one piece of it was mental load disparity, but they also were under financial distress. They were working 60 hours a week. They were caretaking an in-law. Just lots of different things were going on. And so that's a very long, convoluted answer of why I eventually wrote the book, was because I was seeing it everywhere and how devastating mismanaged stress was to relationships.
Mm. So powerful because in the book you say like people think it's the relationship issues, but in fact, it's that are stressing them out, but it's a collective stress that's causing relationship challenges.
Yeah, so often people will come into the therapy room, or even in my own marriage, like it must be our relationship. We just have a bad relationship and that's causing all my problems and all my unhappiness. And certainly it does cause a lot of unhappiness. But what it really boils down to with many of the couples that I see is they come in and they'll present the problem as being each other. So we argue, he's not sensitive enough, she's a nag, this person's withdrawn, this person is always arguing with me. But then when we get beneath it, what's causing a lot of those behaviors and reactions is that each person is carrying a lot of stress.
Mhm.
And this is playing out in the way that they're able to communicate with each other and connect with each other.
Mm. You mentioned that not everyone has the same stress response, that, people respond differently to it. And the more stressed you are, I'm quoting you, the more you lose your ability to express your thoughts and feelings, show humor, solve problems, and offer affection. How come we have different stress responses, and what are some of these different stress responses?
Yeah, so we all respond to stress differently, and there's like a multitude of reasons for that. Some of it is personality style. So it might be nothing about you other than your personality is that you're just more like, whatever, it'll work out. And so maybe a big bill comes in the mail and it doesn't mean anything to you because of your personality, your family history, whatever it is. You're just like, it's okay, it'll work out. And that same bill with the same amount of money in the bank could cause another person to see it and start to have their heart race and every terrible thought in their mind. They're going to lose their home. They're not going to be able to afford it. What do they do? And then maybe their stress responses, they become very argumentative or panicked. And so we all have different responses. And like I said, some of it's personality, some of it has to do with trauma history. Maybe one person in the relationship experienced some sort of acute trauma, like something scary happened to them. And so their nervous system is more easily triggered. Or maybe they had some chronic kind of relational trauma where nobody was ever there for them. And so when something big, stressful happens, they feel like nobody's going to be there for them again. Um, it can also have to do with the relationship history itself. So if you haven't managed it well together throughout the relationship, then you see a big stressful thing come up. You're going to think, well, my partner's not going to be there for me. And now I don't know what to do. And then in response to stressors, some people respond by getting really activated. So they seem more panicked or they become aggravated, agitated, they fight, they say things they don't mean, or they want to talk about it all the time. We've got to talk about it right now. We've got to figure it out. Other people become more withdrawn and avoidant. And so that might be, if we're using the bill example, their partner who's activated says, we need to figure this out right now. And the other person is like, I don't want to talk about it right now. And then they go down in the basement and they watch TV and they don't look at it again. And then some people get frozen, right? And they just shut down and they're not able to engage at all with the people around them or on the topic. Um, Ideally, what happens when we feel stress is that we recognize it and we become collaborative. That's like where we want to get to, is that we're able to be like, whew, that mail that I just opened that had that bill really stresses me out. It stresses me out because you know me. Can you take it? Because I know it doesn't stress you out. Can you go look at the bill or can you talk me through it? But we want to learn how to become collaborators. But unfortunately, most people don't become collaborative when they're stressed. Most people become combative.
Mm. That's so powerful. You talk about pretty much what you were saying, and then you talk about these four stress responses: the venomous king cobra, the fearful deer, the opossum, and playing dead. How do they tie into what you just shared?
Yeah. So, like, King Cobra is the activated one, right? So, when I see a couple who's under stress and they're the Cobra, they're in session and their partner says something like, I don't know what to do with my aging mother. We're gonna have to take care of her. And the partner who's the Cobra says something like, I don't give an F about your mother. you know that stress causes them to become like very venomous. And so contempt, criticism, anger, rage, that comes out as the reaction to stress. And again, there's a lot of reasons for that. It's not that the person isn't a bad person necessarily, it's that they feel threatened. And when they feel threatened, they're going to snap. And then you've got the fearful deer, right? And that's like, they're just going to run off. And so they're like deer in the headlights at first. And you say to them, we really need to talk about how your mother always kind of criticizes my parenting. We had to set some boundaries, and the other person's like, well, I don't know what you want me to say about that. And then let's just talk about it later. They won't go back to it. They're kind of avoiding it. They're fleeing from the situation. And then the person who plays dead, when there's something stressful going on in the family with finances, with the kids, with anything stressful, a medical issue, they are not involved at all. So it kind of gets confused with that deer where like both of them are in some ways avoidant, but the deer is like, I see it and I'm actively running away from it. Like, we'll talk about it next week. I know we need to talk about it, but I don't want to talk about it now. I'll deal with my mom next week. Next time I'm at the office, I'll talk to my boss. But the one that plays dead, like the possum, is somebody who just kind of completely disconnects. And so in couples therapy, what I'll see is a partner where they'll say, we've got a lot going on, but like, you just stay in bed all day. Or, I know work is stressful for you, but when you come home, I want you to join us at dinner. And what you're doing every night is you're just going straight to your office and you're not engaging with anybody. And when we can look at it through the lens of these are stress responses, and I'm not saying that's 100% of the time, there's certainly relationships where a partner goes off to their office because they don't care.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't want to be around the family. There's certainly times where somebody is vitriolic and cobra like because they're abusive. There's certainly times where somebody's avoidant because they want to be childlike and they don't want to take control of their lives. And if you reflect and you think, we've got a lot going on, I know my partner better than that. And I know that this is like not their norm.
Mm-hmm.
This is odd that my partner is just disappearing. This is odd that they're so angry all the time. Um, then what you want to look at is, well, what's going on that's causing this experience in life that we're having to feel so threatening? Because they're responding as if they're threatened right now.
Mm. I love that you made that distinction, and I think that's so powerful of like, is this the norm? Is this how they usually act, or is there something else that has infiltrated the relationship that we didn't have in the past?
Yeah. And is there some good faith assessment I can make of this first? I think in our world, and I'm sure that you notice this too, the advice that gets the most attention is the bad faith advice.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're a jerk, or if this person's not talking to you, it's because they don't love you, or something like they're like any of these like non-nuanced things. But if you're in a committed long-term relationship, you want to try to lean into first. It doesn't mean forever. What's like the best faith assessment I can make of my partner's behavior right now? And if I came home and they like bit my head off because of the way I came in, is that because they're a jerk, or is there something going on? You know? And when you do that, you become better collaborators, and you actually you start to see those behaviors happen less. Like I become a cobra. I become very like, get out of my space. I need everybody to listen to me. I'm irritated. I'm activated. And as soon as my husband sees it, he's able to be my collaborator instead of the person who goes against me. And so if I walk in the door and I'm all grumpy, he says to me, "Are you okay? Or did something happen today?" And then I'm able to be like, "Yeah, sorry, it's not you guys." I'm like overwhelmed about this email I just got. Um, Rather than if we look at it through the bad faith lens, somebody walks in the door and they seem grouchy and we say, "What's your problem again?" Why are you always bringing this attitude into the house? And that only adds more stress and more threatening feelings into the relationship and into that person.
I love that. I mean, you're a Gottman trained therapist, and one of the teachings is to always give your partner the benefit of the doubt, right? It's like
Yeah.
an indicator of a strong relationship.
Yeah.
But in the book, and you mentioned this earlier on, there was that those challenges that you and your husband were having after the first child. How long did it take in your own marriage, for you both to be emotionally attuned with one another, to be able to pick up on those cues?
I think that's such a good question because the reality is it's like a journey always, because life is always changing. I tell couples a lot that you're going to face your biggest difficulties during transition points
Mhm.
because they are things you've never experienced. So when you have the first baby, when you move, when you buy a house together, when somebody gets a new job, somebody gets more money than the other person gets, somebody dies, a parent dies or a best friend. Those are the places where you're going to struggle because it's the first time you've experienced it as individuals. And then it's the first time you've experienced it as a couple. And so you're always going to have to learn how to reattune, right? Like Andrew doesn't know who I am yet. I don't even necessarily know who I am yet when I'm an empty nester.
Mhm.
I've never been one before. So when our kids go off to college, we're going to have to learn to reattune to each other again. And that might upset me or upset him, and we'll have to deal with that stress. So my answer to the question is that we were able to, through many conversations, and it's not always easy. It's not like the first time I sat down with him and said, "Can I tell you about the mental load?" It didn't change the next day, but we had the conversation. He was able to take it in. And then I think there was like kind of forgetting about the conversation, and or him doing a great job, but me forgetting to see that he was doing a great job. And so it takes a little bit of time to be like, oh, wait, this is different. And I am responding to this person differently, and they are responding to me differently. And so that was like, several months of that, just back and forth. Like, is this changing? I'm still frustrated with you. Well, why are you frustrated with me? I feel like I've done something to change it. And then me being like, yeah, I guess you have. I don't know why I'm frustrated with you. And getting really good at that. And then, then COVID happened. And it's like, that's a new thing. Okay, well, how does he react when he's stressed with work? How do I learn to attune with that? Probably at first, when he actually, I know when he showed that he was stressed at work, I would get frustrated with him and I would be like, you know what? It's all hard right now. Why are you grouchy? We need to just like get it together. And then very quickly, I was like, wait, he's stressed because the world is like collapsing right now. He's worried about work. Why am I talking to him that way? Why am I not being his collaborator and attuning to him and recognizing he's stressed? And that got better, and then there's going to be a million other transitions. And so I think what I'm trying to express is that as long as you have a willing partner, the attunement can start pretty quickly, but it doesn't happen overnight. And it doesn't stay that way forever. You have to be willing to say, oh, this is a new thing. And I'm surprised by my own reaction. And let me pause and let me kind of reattune with this person again.
Such a realistic response, right? Because like sometimes we hear, even with the concept of boundaries that you talk about as well, and I loved how you worded the boundaries. Where is my notes? You called it setting limits with love. I
Setting
love
limits with love.
because sometimes people have this misconception of I said it once and it needs to click for
Mm-hmm.
him, for me. And the way you just described it is a little bit more graceful, a little bit more patient, a little bit more curious as you're both adjusting and reflecting and pivoting together.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're setting limits with love, you can cue the other person into it when they've become unattuned to you. So you can, like somebody gets really stressed and let's say they become activated and angry and you have limits, you're able to say, I love you. I know you're stressed right now because I know you. And I'm not hanging out with you while you're acting like this. I'm going to go in the other room. Or I know that when you get in the car and there's a lot of traffic, you get really pissed off and you still do that when you're stressed. So I don't get in the car with you during rush hour. Like I either drive or we can leave afterwards. So you're setting limits to help make sure that you and the relationship aren't impacted by the stress, but you don't have to do it in a harsh way.
I love that. Such a soft, graceful approach. You mentioned something in the book that I hadn't read before, and this is the difference between the emotional versus the wise mind. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there's a concept in DBT therapy, and I'm not a DBT therapist, but I love the concept and I use it a lot when I'm working with couples. DBT therapy is for individuals, but I use it with couples, or this concept. So we have a lot of different parts of ourselves, right? And we have a part of ourselves that makes decisions based off of emotions and has perceptions based off of emotions. So I'm angry right now. It must mean that you did a bad thing to me. I feel angry, so now I'm going to act on that. I'm going to yell at you or something like that. And then we have this other part of ourselves. It's a wise mind. And this part of ourselves is more like the thinking center. So it's like, well, I might have a feeling, but I don't really look at that feeling. I just look at my thoughts. And so, regardless of the feelings, the best decision for me to make is X, Y, and Z. And people often live in one or the other. So some people will be more the person who is like, well, that doesn't really make sense. We should do it this way. Feelings don't matter. And the other person will be like, well, no, like, that makes me sad or that makes me uncomfortable. I don't want to do it that way. Really, though, what we want is to be able to notice our feelings and to recognize that sensation is telling us something. Just like if we have an ache in our toe, that sensation is saying, you stubbed your toe, you cut it, you need to get a band aid and clean it. So you want to notice your feelings. If you're saying, I only live in the rational mind all the time, then you're cutting out a ton of information. So can you say, I feel angry right now? I know I feel angry. That must be giving me information. I know I feel stressed, worried, sad. And I also want to pause and think about what I know in my mind. And so I'm angry at my partner and I know they're having a hard time. I have both of those things, right? I I'm panicked and feel like the world is going to end. That's the emotional part of myself. And the cognitive part of myself knows I've been through something like this before and I can probably figure it out. And so we want to learn how do we balance those two things. Terry Real, in his work, he essentially uses these two things, but he calls them the wise adult and the adaptive child and the wounded child, right? And so he talks about how can you start to integrate these things. Like it's okay for that adaptive child to be there and to say, this scares me, or this makes me feel disrespected or angry. And my grown-up mind knows that it's not going to help me if I yell.
Mhm.
So I can be angry, but the wise part of me knows if I yell right now, it's not going to help the relationship. And the more you can work on kind of living within both of those parts, the better you're going to navigate situations because you're going to use all of the important information instead of only half of it.
I love that. And if the rupture does take place, let's say we act out on the emotional mind and we're getting angry and we say things that we don't mean. I know you talk about this in your book, I Want This to Work, but for those who haven't read that book, which I recommend you to read, what can we do in that moment to repair?
Yeah. So, we all I'm very realistic. I've worked with hundreds of couples. I have my own relationships. What I say to people all the time is like, you're gonna say the wrong thing. You're going to explode in your own way. Some people explode outwardly, some people explode inwardly by just kind of removing themselves. You're going to, it's just going to happen. And so when that does happen, there's two inflection points. During that conversation, there's the opportunity to repair. And then after, there's also the opportunity to repair. And so ideally, as things are getting hot, we're working to keep them warm, right? And so it's like I notice that the temperature is going up. My heart is racing. I just said something nasty, or I see that my partner is shut down. That's my cue that things have gotten hot. What can I do that's warm? What I could do that's warm is I could say anything that creates repair. So I could say, you know what, I'm really sorry that we're yelling now. I don't want us to do that. Let's try to talk to each other differently. Warm could be, I love you. You know, we're fighting, but while we're fighting, I just want you to know I love you. It could be just touching the other person's hand. It could be letting them know you want to take a break. Hey, this is not going where I wanted it to go. I want to take a break. So anything that shows I'm safe, I'm not a threat, and I recognize things are getting hot and I'm trying to be a warm person with you, that can create repair in the moment. Now, sometimes we forget to do that. We can't access doing that because our minds are oversaturated with all of the stress hormones. Or we try to do it and the other person doesn't accept it. That's all a possibility. And so in those cases, sometimes we have to repair afterwards. And the way we repair afterwards is that you come back and you talk about what happened, not what you were talking about. You don't say, well, I want to go back and talk about the argument we were having about your dad. You say, I want to talk about like what happened between us. You know, I noticed that I got really loud with you. And I noticed that I said mean things. And I think that that happened because I felt kind of threatened,
Mhm.
feeling like you weren't going to speak to your dad. And I didn't think you had my back, but that wasn't nice. And I wish I would have done this differently. The other person, you know, I noticed that I didn't have your back. I got really defensive over my dad. I don't know why I did that. And then being able to talk about what are we going to do to move forward? Like next time this happens, what do we want to do so that it doesn't get to the point that it got again? And I call that a hard conversation. So you're learning to like halt and then you're attending to attachment needs first. I love you. This isn't going anywhere. And then you're repairing. I'm really sorry. And then you're debriefing. What happened? What the heck just happened there? And doing that helps to repair that interaction, to kind of take you back to a healthy baseline with each other. So you're not starting from some sort of deficit with each other moving forward.
So practical, so useful. Thank you so much. Last question. Towards the end of the book, you say none of us are immune to the real world.
Mm.
And the sooner we can accept that and drop our entitlements, the sooner we can work alongside the people we love to actually solve problems and move forward.
Yeah.
I love the drop our entitlements
Drop
part.
your entitlements. I'm sure that that's gotten some bad reaction.
But it's honest, right? The
It's
sooner we
honest.
can do that, the better it gets.
Yeah, one of the hardest things in couples therapy is that people will often feel entitled to a life that doesn't exist
Hmm.
rather than accept the life that does. And by accepting, I don't mean liking. You're not saying I accept this because it's good and because it's okay. The thing you're going through might not be okay. It might be really, really, really bad. Um, and wrong and unjust, whatever it is. And it's real.
Hmm.
And so, how do you learn to, instead of saying, I'm not going to be okay until you change or your mother changes or we don't have this debt anymore or we don't, How do you instead say, you know what? I like wasn't really promised, nobody promised me an easy life. This is the thing we're facing right now. And we can either be against each other with the thing we're facing, or we can help each other with it. But imagining that one day everything's going to be better overnight without that collaboration, like that might not get us anywhere. Um, and with it's even with basic things. Like I have a lot of people, even myself, right? It's like this idea of, well, it shouldn't be this way.
Mhm.
It shouldn't be this hard to deal with our house. It shouldn't be this hard to deal with our kids. I shouldn't have to deal with this tax bill. It's ridiculous that it exists. Sure, maybe that's true. And it does exist. So what do you do with each other to help relieve the burden that's placing on you, even if that just means that you're kind of adapting together as supports for each other?
Mm. And you share so many practical tools inside of the book, which I highly recommend everyone to read over and over again because, again, they're so practical. They're so, I wouldn't say they're simple, but they're not complicated. The way you
Yeah.
broke it down, it's not complicated. It might feel it in that moment, but it's not.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for writing this book for the first one as well. I want this to work. You again, share so many simple, practical tools of connection, of repair, of communication, conflict resolution. And all of these are relational skills that we need to have if we want to have a healthy relationship.
Thank you so much for having me on again. It was so good to talk to you.
It was so lovely to have you on. I'm going to put the name of the book in the show notes. I highly, again, recommend everyone to buy both. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing, creating content on social media, and for all that you do.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Speak soon.